The Wife of His Youth by Charles W. Chestnutt. In the late 19th century and at the turn of the 20th century, he was considered the first African-American imaginative writer to be taken seriously by the white press. He was born of freeborn blacks from North Carolina in Cleveland, Ohio, and he is emblematic of the African-American folktale tradition, the irony of a seemingly stereotypical comical dialect, the seriousness and humanity in spite of prejudiced and often Anglo-centric, that is, white-centric, reactions to such dialect. In other words, hearing a local African-American dialect and kind of capitalizing on the reader's prejudiced expectations that this is somehow ignorant and, well, working that, creatively turning that against the reader. Themes: the complexity of racial identity, especially in terms of passing. Passing, if you're not familiar with that term in this context, was a practice, certainly around Reconstruction and into the early 20th century, a sad reality of, well, what African Americans had to resort to sometimes if they had this quote-unquote luxury, was if they were light-skinned enough to pass as white people, to avoid discrimination, which of course took on some pretty brutal and unimaginable forms. And the narrow limits of white reality, and especially the white reality's inability to understand African American life. It, of course, being a completely different perspective and a different experience, and hence a different quote-unquote reality. Some considerations for while you're reading The Wife of His Youth: the complexity of racial identity, how dominant white culture engenders intra-racial as opposed to interracial prejudice and snobbery. A very curious thing that you will notice immediately in The Wife of His Youth is that there is racial and class snobbery going on within a black community. Hence the intra. That means prejudice within a race, not inter, between two different races. And African American reappropriation of the American Gothic. You will see tropes that should smack of the Gothic to you, but notice how Chestnutt is using them against, say, how a typically white American author would. He uses it in a very different way, a way that possibly comments on some of the certainly less savory assumptions that go on in the way that traditional white American authors have employed American Gothic tropes. I look forward to your responses.